So looking back over what is now more than 40 years, some patterns do emerge in the aims and approaches that I've sought to follow through my work. And I think in a way they can be summarized in 4 straightforward beliefs. First of all, a conviction that law has the potential to be an instrument of social change. Secondly, a commitment to giving voice to those who are marginalized, those who are invisible, and must be part of a politics of inclusivity. Thirdly, a firm belief in the need to build and continually strengthen effective and accountable institutions of governance at every level, from local to global. And finally, an acknowledgement of the importance of leadership and a deep belief that we can each make a difference. Everyone can actually make a contribution and make some difference. And that's the wonderful challenge for all of us. So let me say a few words about each of these and then try to link them to the business and human rights agenda. First, the role of law. My career began working as a lawyer before both the Irish and the European courts, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, the European Community Court in Luxembourg. I was fortunate enough to be involved in cases that affected in particular the situation of women in Ireland. Cases which, for example, resulted in the removal of discriminatory taxation of married women, the full participation of women in the jury system in Irish courts, the introduction of legal aid, which was a case that went to Strasbourg, the abolition of the status of illegitimacy for children, another case that went to Strasbourg, and the achievement of equal pay and equal opportunity in the workplace, a case that went to Luxembourg. I learned the value of test cases and the equivalent of class actions at the national level. And more profoundly, I saw how a law written in a book and decided in a courtroom could sooner or later reverberate back into the lives of individuals and help to achieve equality and greater freedoms. Years later, when I became President of Ireland, I realized that I had a completely different role to play in promoting human rights. I learned then about the importance of being with people who needed to have a stronger sense of their place and listening to those who are marginalized and bringing those experiences into the mainstream. I learned too how a more inclusive society could be shaped in significant part through stories and symbols. You may have heard about the fact that as president, indeed, on the night of my election, I said I would put a light in the window of my official residence for those who'd had to emigrate from Ireland, mainly because of deep poverty and also because they were seeking greater freedoms. At the time, I had a candle in mind, and then I learned no candle, that would not be secure. So we got a special lamp made to put in the window. And I realized the importance for immigrants of that connection back home, that they felt included. And many of them said to me when I visited various parts of the world, "We know you have a light in the window," and that made a difference. But their stories, the stories of the diaspora, were also important back home in the Ireland of the 1990s. Let me give you just one example to illustrate. On an official visit to Canada, I went to a place called Grosse Île in Quebec. It was a spot where thousands of sick and starving Irish had landed and died during the years of the Great Irish Famine in the mid-19th century. When I returned home, I used opportunities to talk about what I had heard there, of how the mayor of Montreal had cared for the sick and himself caught the contagion and died. I recalled as well how many Irish orphans were taken in and raised by families in Quebec, being allowed to keep their Irish surnames. And you'll find that in the province of Quebec. Irish surnames have been handed down, and they were the orphans of the Irish famine. I told these and other stories as a way of reminding all of the people of Ireland that we had faced many difficulties in our own history and had been on the margins for much of it. Now, as a country that had benefited from economic growth and other opportunities of the modern age, I believed we had our part to play and to help those who needed us. I found these were the ways I could use the office to advance a politics of inclusivity, of shared responsibility, of reaching out and recalling where we came from as a people. It proved to be another valuable way of promoting a deeper idea of human rights in Ireland and on the global agenda. As President and later as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, I continued to believe strongly in the importance of seeking to be a moral voice. But I knew much more was needed. Human rights would never be protected without effective and accountable institutions of governance. Whether as President or High Commissioner or civil society watchdog, you can only do so much to draw attention to human rights violations and urge governments to live up to their obligations. Strong and accountable institutions of governance, starting from the local right up to the global level. This was where law and international commitments would need to be turned into concrete actions to improve the lives of people. My time as High Commissioner and our work at Realising Rights over the last 8 years has been very much about the importance of helping governments in need of strengthened capacity to deliver on their human rights commitments. We've moved away, and I think in a kind of piloting an interesting way, from traditional human rights advocacy approaches involving naming and shaming, though these remain vital. I'm not in any way disregarding them. They need to be pursued. But we've moved towards reminding governments of their commitments. And we say to them, you've said you wish to implement human rights. Let's work together to see how these commitments should influence the priorities you set, the policies you announce, the budgets you allocate. Let's see how human rights can be not just about a set of goals on paper, but also a way of working, a way of involving civil society and other societal actors in decision-making across the board. Just today, I sat with some of you, with Cora and others, in the gallery of the UN Security Council with over 100 women activists determined to hold its members to their promises on women's rights and empowerment on the 10th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325. There was a real sense today that civil society, that huge gallery of women activists, was holding the Security Council accountable, saying, we're watching you, we know what you're doing, you are the institution with the tools to make a difference, we want you to do it. This approach of working with institutions and holding them to account won't work in all places, but where there is a will to act and limited capacity to put in place effective institutions, governments themselves need help. We've seen this through our work at Realising Rights, how much this can really make a difference. Our support to health ministries in countries like Sierra Leone on the right to health care for all, and our work in Liberia to support the Labour Ministry in putting in place policies that foster decent employment opportunities are just two examples of where governments clearly benefit from even modest financial and technical assistance. I was with some of my colleagues in Liberia about 10 days ago, and I was really surprised sitting in the Ministry of Labour, where the Deputy Minister and subsequently the Minister himself thanked Realising Rights for the help that we have given over a period of about 5 or 6 years there. And it was an accounting of the various steps they wanted to take. They wanted to have a labour force survey, and they couldn't get support from anyone, and Realising Rights came in. They wanted to have a policy paper on decent work legislation, which they wanted to introduce, and somehow it was Realising Rights that really supported them. I say that because that was my colleagues. It was nice to hear somehow a human rights organisation that was strategically there for the Ministry of Labour of a developing post-conflict country that wanted to have and has now a very good policy on decent work. And I think we in the human rights community need to think more about similar opportunities. The point is that the challenges of Realising Rights are not just about what governments shouldn't be doing, like preventing freedom of association, not torturing, not blocking exercise of free speech. It's also about what they should do. provide effective institutions of justice, health systems, education, labour institutions across the areas of fundamental human rights. Yet how difficult this can be even for the world's richest countries, let alone for those recovering from conflict or struggling to achieve economic and social development. It's a lesson that I think we still need to stress and act on.